And welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. The advent of the digital age has ushered in a new era of communication, revolutionizing the way we interact and connect with one another. Technology has provided us with unprecedented tools for communication, but it has also brought forth a myriad of challenges that impact our ability to engage in meaningful conversations and truly listen to one another. While technology has broken down barriers geographically, made communication easier and more convenient, as well as enhanced the artistic aspect of communication through things such as the ability to send photos and videos, it's also brought about a host of different challenges. From creating distractions and shortening attention spans to contributing to the ever growing exposure to echo chambers where our perspectives become limited to only like minded individuals. And more than anything, reducing the nuances only achieved by face to face or voice to ear communication, thus leading to misinterpreted messaging, miscommunications, and even conflicts. Technology has created limitations on human interaction. There is a beautiful balance to be struck between the enrichment of connections and the challenges to effective communication. And one might say there's an art to it. Today's guest, Francis Altman, is an author and educator whose remarkable 50-year writing career has covered a diverse range of genres and has occurred in arenas ranging from newspapers to books. Currently, she's dedicated to teaching seniors the joys of writing and self-expression. Her latest book, Destiny's Daughter, is a creative chronology of Mary Edwards Walker, who was one of America's first female physicians and also happened to be a proponent of excellent communication, among many other things. And I am honored to welcome to the show Francis Altman. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Yes, good morning there, Jennifer, and thank you for inviting me to participate on your program. I've listened to it, and it's has some interesting topics that go along with the conversation. And as you know, communications, writing, listening, speaking, are such important parts of our society that it's sort of necessary that we sort of keep them up. But in a way, I sometimes feel that they need a little bit of rehabilitation with programs like yours.
I agree. I think communication, like I said, it's a lost art. And I have seen this, my generation, we are the ones who kind of got the front end of cell phones, right? Like I remember I was 16 and my parents were like, you cannot drive unless you have the cell phone with you. But when I say the cell phone with you, it was like we had one cell phone for the family. And, staying in touch was very important for safety reasons. And we saw it as such a convenience and such a good tool. But now I'm looking at my daughter who is 14 and, there's very little face-to-face conversation anymore. It's all done through texting and shorthand and emojis and all these little videos that they send each other that when it comes time to talk face-to-face, it's almost unnerving how awkward they are. There's just no, I don't know, finesse to it. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but it's kind of funny because you're like, oh, they're awkward teenagers, but you're like, no, they really don't know how to talk to one another.
You just stole everything that I was going to say, because that is exactly what's happening. It seems we have gone to a shortcut or a shorthand technology, and as you mentioned, the almost everything that we come in contact with, like Twitter, X, restricts the amount of words that we can use, and then also on everything on our phones, and also then on computers. We're using emojis, we're using emoticons, we're seeing butterflies and smiley faces instead of expressing that expression in words. And and as you say, my granddaughter, when I send her a message, I'd like to know if she's received it. And so I've taught her sort of, or ask her, please put back yuck on there, some little ID. And so she puts a B on there to tell me that she has received what I'm saying. It's, and that's, iPhones really are such a convenience that I think they are helpful, and particularly to older people, because you can have it and you can get in touch with people. But when it comes to writing and trying to communicate person to person, we've just sort of lost the skill. I really don't have a lot of recommendations for people other than some of the traditional ways are still working.
Absolutely. And, I think back to just, I mean, even 50 years ago, maybe 60 years ago, I'm discounting my age here. I'm a little older than I think sometimes. But, when you're looking 60 years ago, letters, you had to write letters and you had to wait for them to get there. And there was this anticipation, wondering, am I going to get a letter? Am I not going to get a letter? And, I remember when I met my husband, I was 13 and he was also 13, and we didn't have email access. We didn't have instant messenger access right away. And so he wrote me letters, and I still have those letters. And there was always this, am I going to get a letter today? I don't know. And we'd get a phone call and be like, hey, I wrote you a letter. It'll be there next week or whatever. There was just something special about it. And there was something to be said for the effort put forth. Whereas now I can sit here with my phone and send my husband a text message, holding my phone, and say, send Rob a text message that says, and I don't have anything to do with it except the thoughts in my head. And so I kind of, not saying that that's wrong, but I'm saying I kind of miss those letters too.
Well, those letters now letters from any of the, unfortunately, world wars, they're now collecting those in historical societies, and we're using that for our historical research. But you were talking about when you first began writing. Also, I remember when, and it's not been that many decades ago, when you would go to the doctor's office and he would have these 5 faces up on the wall, and one would be smiley, and then the 5th one would be like in tears, and that's how they would register your pain. And that I think that's where all this emoji business just started. We just grew up with it, and it expanded, and now there's hundreds of different expressions. And not that they're bad. I think they're cute, and sometimes when you don't have anything to say, they do help. They'll cheer someone up or make them smile. And there again is smiling. People, sometimes they don't smile anymore, and that is an expression that you can read.
Absolutely. I think, we forget that body language and facial expressions, we get so caught up in our head because we're sitting here on our phones looking down and we're in our own little bubble. We forget there's a world around us. And so you have to have that other form of communication that one says, I am approachable, or touch that person. There's a reason that we are able to show emotion. And I'm not saying I love technology. Like I'm not saying that I don't love technology. I really do. But again, we are missing out on some of the art and the emotion behind it. And so that brings me to ask, tell us about you and how you got into writing in the first place, and why writing is so important to you.
Well, a couple of things. I began writing back even in grade school when, and I won some kind of a little ribbon or something from the Country Gentleman by writing about something about the farm life, and grew up on a farm. And from there, I was able to go to a good high school that the English teachers, every week you had to write something, and it just came very naturally, it seemed to me. And then I was married and was a stay-at-home mom writing. And I started editing and writing for local newspapers and stuff like that before I started going into a formal education. And was lucky enough, really lucky, back in the traditional days, to have a publisher that picked up some of my material and published 4 books for them. But then the times began changing, and I went on my merry way into what I thought was a good career. But getting back to you mentioned something there that in preparing for our talk today, I went online where you can find anything you want to know, and discovered that back in March there was, in the New Yorker magazine, there was a very good article called "What Conversation Can Do for Us." And it's not the bad, but anyway, it gives a couple of different viewpoints on what other more professionals than myself have said about what's happening to communications. And I'll just keep blabbering on here.
Yeah, no, just keep on. I want to hear more about that.
So there's sort of two reflections of the debating community, and particularly this world champion debater named Bo C. I guess it's COSCO. He feels that the conversation should be more like a debate, where one person is speaking and the other is listening and then responds, and then back and forth, sort of like a tennis game. But also, there's another professor, Paula. Goodness, I've forgotten her name. I apologize. Who at Drexel University, who believes Cohen, who believes that that the debate scenario is too restrictive because you have rules and so forth. So she goes along pretty much with that, but also believes that you should do more free form, but still a back and forth, allowing time and pausing between the times that people are speaking. And we don't do that anymore. I mean, someone like myself, we're just blabbering on, and the other person is listening, and then they're looking away. You know, as you say, behavior will tell you that they're not paying much attention to you. So that's sort of, I think, where we find ourselves today. We're just sort of in the middle of learning or relearning, anyway, how to converse with each other.
Absolutely. My background is in counseling, and you have to, listening does not come naturally to every person. Like, you have to sometimes teach yourself to listen. And as a counselor, that's kind of your job, right? You listen and you reflect back what you're hearing, and you turn it around and you ask the question, what I'm hearing you say is, and, is this what you're saying? Is this what you mean by that? And, the same is true. You can't just immediately jump to your answer in your head, because you're going to miss out on the nuances of body language. You're going to miss out on inflections and that kind of thing if you're not actively listening. And that's one of the things that that you learn as a counselor and in counseling, is how to actively listen to the person that's talking. And that means, maintaining eye contact or maintaining engagement in some form or fashion, and showing the person that you are listening. Otherwise, they're going to say immediately in their own mind, they're going to say, they don't care what I have to say, and therefore communication shuts down and they're not going to speak anymore. And so we have to, as we want people to hear us, we have to be willing to listen as well. And so I agree. I think the debate method is a little too rigid, because there are rules. You get so many minutes to talk, you get so many minutes to respond, and it has to be off the cuff response and that kind of thing. And that's not how we as humans process our emotions. We can't do it instantly. So when you take emotion out of conversation, it becomes very clinical, and that's not healthy either.
Well, once when I was back in marketing in my earlier days, one of the things that you would always tell your CEO or someone that was going to be, and it even works today, when they're being bombarded by microphones and so forth, stop a minute and count 3 in your mind and then respond. And so many, if you watch television, you'll see they're still using that technique, and they'll say yes, and then you come back with your response, because it's giving you time to think what you're going to say. And again, as you mentioned, you're not, you might be old enough to remember back in the debates with Senior Bush. One time he was in the debate and he looked at his watch during the debating, as though and he wasn't listening to what, it was obvious he wasn't listening to what anyone else was saying. And that's all the media talked about, was, he wasn't paying attention to what someone was saying, which is,
Yes.
which is really humorous. But not getting into politics, but I think it was about 79, yes, when was that the Clinton administration? That's when the national conversation was brought up by both Hillary and Bill Clinton as part of their program that they wanted to introduce with everyone, that we should start talking about all kinds of situations racial, political, even just anything. And that was somewhat successful. But then when it went into, and it continued on into the Obama administration, he wanted to have a national conversation on any topic, from race to education and so forth. Then he also decided, by the time 1922 came along, that, 2022. Anyway, that the whole system had sort of failed, that we really had not had as many national conversations as he would have liked and had developed. So I think during that period is when the deterioration sort of began in conversations. Well, deep conversations. I think many people who are close friends and wouldn't get in arguments with each other do have good conversations and do use the back and forth situation. Certainly in marriage, you sort of have to do that. Sometimes you have to bite your tongue.
You're not wrong, but do you know that's one of the biggest killers of marriages is a lack of communication? And I will tell you that even in the closest friendships, I have seen technology come between friends because, and I've experienced it myself, and I have been guilty of this action as well, where I'm talking and the other person picks up their cell phone because it buzzes with a text message, or their Apple Watch buzzes and they immediately check it. And that tells me that you're no longer listening to me. You're no longer engaged in the conversation because something else has taken your attention. And like I said, I've been guilty of it too. Even talking to my husband, my phone will buzz and I'll be like, "Ooh, let me check this real quick." And, it's one thing if you were already engaged in that conversation and someone's interrupting you, you're like, "Hey, give me just a second. I'm working here," but the expectation has been set. So if you are sitting there listening, again, that expectation that you're engaged has been set. And so when you decide to take your attention and turn it elsewhere, like, what are you telling that person? You are no longer important to me. You no longer matter. And that's where the downfall of a lot of relationships happen, whether it's platonic or romantic relationships.
Yes, that's right. And that goes into the fact that, where do you learn how to have a conversation anymore? One of my suggestions to everybody, even students and people who say, well, how do you get into a conversation, is join smaller groups like book clubs, your church, your lodge, any place, even the quilting group at senior citizens, because you're there with a group of friendly people, and you're able to talk. You have a chance to talk. It's not like being in a big crowd where you're meeting someone, and then you can sort of practice this back and forth, listen to what they're saying, and then respond. That's before you go, sometimes you talk about you're going to some type of a meeting, and you're going to meet strangers and things. Sort of look up what's the current events, what's the weather. Find yourself a few little niches there of things that you can bring up, and they can respond back to you easily. And that way you're able to sort of start the conversation. And as you say, they may be looking around or whatever, and that tells you that's it. You're done with it.
Yes, and that's so true.
It doesn't have to be lengthy,
Yeah. And I think you can very easily, check in with somebody. Now, I had this conversation with somebody recently too, who said, if you're going to ask somebody, "How are you today?" be willing to actually hear the true answer and let them know that you care what that true answer is. Otherwise, be like, "Are you having a good day?" So don't make it a very personal question. But the same is true. If somebody says, "How are you today?" Decide, am I really going to go into detail here? And that's a conversation you can have with somebody. Well, I'm struggling today. I'm kind of tired. I didn't sleep well last night, and that's just being honest and truthful.
Yes, I just practiced that this earlier last week. I went to a dermatologist office and was sitting around, and there were about, I don't know, 20 people sitting there, and I started talking to this man, and he did exactly that. A couple of people said, "Oh, hello, how are you?" And then they're not listening, but they have a response. But then this gentleman started telling me all of his ailments. So you suddenly feel like you should be listening and responding in some way. So it's not difficult to start start a conversation, but you have to be willing to shut up a little bit and listen to them, and then use the response system so that it's a sharing of information.
Oh, for sure. One of my favorite acronyms for, the answer we always give, how are you today? Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm doing, especially here in this, I'm fine. And one of my favorite acronyms, it stands for,
who cares?
and the acronym that I'm like, that means feelings inside, not expressed. Like, that's what FINE stands for. I'm fine. I got feelings, but I'm not expressing them today.
So right.
So, in our pre-show communication, in one of the emails that I got from you, you believe that everyone has a creative gift, and that conversation is a good way to explore and find that creative gift. Let's talk about that, because it's actually come up in conversation for me more than once in this last week. Somebody was talking about, what am I good at? People tell me that I'm not good at this, but I feel like I am. How can we use conversations like that, or different kinds of conversation, to explore our creative side and figure out what we are actually good at?
Good question. See, and I responded back to you while I'm thinking. That is a good question, because so many people will think that creativity really means something to do like arts, musicians, really high-tech people. And they say, oh, I'm not creative at all. But they seem to forget that, like, even cooking and quilting and things like that bring out the creative parts of people. And I mean, just the other day, there was a food stylist that was talking about, how the chefs decorate dress the dishes and style the food that they put out. That's a talent, and that's come from creativity. And when you're talking with someone, you need to sort of jump to hobbies first, or what do they do for relaxation, and that usually tells you what their creativity direction is. Because even just writing they say, oh, writing's a creativity, but you do have to acquire sort of the rules of the game before you can really do anything with your writing. And painting and all of those things have somewhat of a discipline with them. But when you once get going, even very simple things become creative in other people's eyes. So that's how I sort of identify who is creative, by asking them a question or two about what it may get you off the topic you're talking about, but at least you're getting into where they're, and then they'll realize, I think, and you can compliment them on, or they'll even show you what they're doing. And so many times it is the simple creativity things that you can admire. I can't cook, I mean, that well, but other people really have some exciting recipes. Baking bread, and making bread with braids in it, and that kind of stuff is really creative. And so here I am babbling on again about, but you really have to sort of look very, very close and be willing to do that. Give your friend or whoever you're talking with the time to respond back to you, and you sort of have to probe at what it is that they're finding so relaxing.
I think also you have to be willing to hear somebody say that what you think you're good at, you might not be good at. I know that sounds terrible, but you have to be open to some critical feedback sometimes. And if you're asking the right people, they're going to give it to you in a way that's respectful and graceful. But for instance, I know of a child who, she can't sing. I mean, God love her. She can't sing, but her mama tells her she can, and she really shouldn't, but she does. And I'm almost, you hear what other people say, like, oh, that you did so good. And it's not a genuine compliment. And so, one, we've got to be willing to be honest with people. And two, we need to be able to hear other people say, that's probably not what you're gifted at, but let me tell you what you are gifted at, and then help them. Because I know that I can see, like, my daughter, she is very gifted at art. She's very gifted at music, but singing is probably not her gift. And so we don't push that gift. We're like, hey, you sing your heart out. like you're on Broadway in the shower as much as you want. But until we have voice lessons, we're not going to get on stage. I know that sounds harsh, but I think we have to be willing to provide that feedback to say, if this is what you want to be good at, let's practice it and find ways to get better at it.
Well, today, so many in my age group, they want to write. They admire people that write, and almost anyone I feel can write if they'll just write. They probably didn't used to write letters, and that's one of the best ways to start writing is write yourself a letter, and then you can write a memoir or something, a little scene from your background or relatives or something like that you want to give as a gift. Then you can start writing if you just say, dear so-and-so, and you can easily get into it. And writing itself is a form of relaxation that decreases stress and anxiety. Even the Veterans Administration has a formal program for veterans to write and be able to put down some of their past thoughts, and it will give them relaxation to do that. And those, by the way, are available at some libraries and so forth that they can attend on a regular basis. But here again, if you're thinking about writing, don't think in terms of writing a novel or something like that, but writing something small that you might enjoy or your relatives might enjoy receiving. So that's one of my suggestions, I guess, for taking a route to relaxation and less stress.
Oh, absolutely. I think everybody has a story to tell. And whether you share that story through speaking or through writing, or, you can share your story through painting or music or anything like that. If you have a story to tell and you want to tell it, then there are plenty of ways for you to start working on discovering what skills you do have to share that story. And I love writing. I have always loved writing, even when I was a kid. And it wasn't until just a couple of years ago when I decided I was going to do something more than just write for myself. I started writing novels. And so that's been really fun and exciting just to kind of dive into that different world. But people were always telling me, hey, you're a good writer, you're a good speaker. And so I had people pouring into me and telling me, hey, this is what you're good at. None of them ever once told me that I was good at painting. And so, I realized that was not a skill that I needed to pursue because I listened when other people told me what, not because I wanted them to define, but because it helps to have people tell you you're on the right path. And so maybe be that person for someone even.
Well, that brings me to another point. Tell me a little bit about your writing. Oh, about what type of books you feel that the public is now interested in. That's sort of a controversy. Are they reading novels to escape and go into fantasy? What's your view on books?
So I love reading. I am an avid reader. I will read. I can tear up 3 or 4 books a week if I dedicate the time to it. Like, I am a reader. Now, there are some weeks where that's not a thing. I'll read a couple hours before bedtime or whatever, but like weeks like this one is not the time that I can finish that many books. But you give me a good Saturday and I can throw 2 down really fast. And so because I just love reading. But I read because I want to avoid responsibilities, or I want to escape reality, the stress of whatever's going on. Or sometimes I'm just bored and I need to engage my mind because my mind will race and give me too many thoughts at one time. And so reading kind of, focuses my attention in one place. And so I love reading. And when I was a kid, I wrote just goofy stories or really bad poetry or all the things. I tried my hand at writing jingles and lyrics just because I was a kid and it was like commercials were a thing. Now kids don't know what commercials are, right? Like, they're not jingles that get stuck in your head. And so we start singing the Oscar Mayer theme song and my kid's like, what? And I'm like, it's a commercial jingle. And so she doesn't have a clue. But so writing was just always a thing. And then a couple of years ago, I had a dream. I woke up from a dream and I thought, oh, the dream was going to end because it wasn't finished. And so I started writing it. And it's a very different story than what I remember the dream being. But it was one of those things that I thought, this is entertaining, this is engaging, and I think other people would find it interesting as well. So that's why I started writing a book. but I've always been a blogger. I've always been a journaler. I've always been someone who put my feelings and stuff into words as it was. And so it was just kind of a natural extension of that.
Oh, before we go another minute, I need to apologize because the professor Drexel, her name is Paula Cohen, Cohen. She was giving the other viewpoint there on how she thought conversations should be, and I couldn't remember her name. That's one of my problems, not only in old age, but I had difficulty remembering names back when I was even younger. So I write a lot of things down like that. So, and that's another way to help remember what what you're trying to talk about.
Oh, for sure. And I think even when you're in conversation with somebody, it's okay to sit there and take a quick note and be like, hey, I want to come back to that. Because sometimes your brain gets ahead of itself and you're like, oh, wait, what was I going to tell you? And so it's okay. It's okay to stop and say, let me write that down real quick so I can come back to it.
But really, conversation versus listening, I feel that the listening part is where we need more study, because conversing and talking just comes so naturally to us that we don't have a problem going ahead, but we do have a problem stopping ourselves so that we're listening to what the other people are saying. And that's not something that's happening right now, because I think in an article I wrote for teachers was that Ann Landers, who was so popular years ago, that was one of her messages every now and then, was just try to listen to what people were saying. And and also when we were talking about getting on the computer there and we're getting emojis and those kinds of things, I think we can listen to those symbols also, because some of them, like attaboys and so forth, they were given with good intentions. And so you are listening to what those people have selected. So, and also, I remember when I was teaching in the business classes, and when computers first came in, and people were writing messages that they really were awkward and they would hurt people's feelings because and now you have down at the bottom of Facebook and places like that, they give you a response right there, like thank you or whatever, and that gives you a start to what you might be able to respond back. So technology is not all bad. It's just that we need to learn to listen to it maybe a little bit better.
I think removing the human element is definitely a problem. And so, yeah, you start with those responses, but also know that I can tell when it's my kid texting me, or it's my husband texting me, or it's my sister I can tell the difference without even seeing who wrote the message. I can just read it and know whose voice it is because I know that person. When you're saying something to someone you don't know that well, you do have to be careful. I made a new friend a couple years ago, and we are still best of friends. And one of the first times I sent her one of those GIFs, the little videos or response to her thing, she said, "Oh, do you speak in GIFs too?" And I was like, "Oh, you have no idea. It's like a love language to find the absolute perfect GIF to respond with." And she was like, "We were meant to be best friends," because not everybody can do that and do it well. And so, you have to know the person that you're talking to, whether it's face to face or technology, and then kind of adapt the way you communicate to that situation. And I think sometimes we fail to adapt because we think it's universal, and it's not. It's really not.
That's so true, so true. It's just trying to read what the other people are saying when they're when you're particularly watching television. Right now is a great time to watch politicians, and the behavioral people tell you, you can read something in what type of tie they're wearing, and what type of pin they're wearing, and also how they're looking out toward the public. But one of the best things to try and utilize when you're talking with somebody personally is to look them in the eyes. If you're speaking and looking away, then that distracts them a little bit, or expresses insincerity. But if you're looking them directly in the eyes, that that does help, I think, in moving your conversations along a little bit better.
It does. And also asking clarifying questions. This is something that I have just learned in the last couple of years to really communicate more effectively is to, somebody says something and you take a minute, like we talked about, you take that beat and you're like, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is, or what did you mean this, or am I misunderstanding? Because a lot of times what they're saying, maybe they're not the best communicator either. And so if you're both on the same page in the end, I think you're doing a good job. But sometimes you have to ask those questions to make sure you land on the same page. Otherwise, you do leave the door open for some serious miscommunications, which can lead to, faulty relationships.
Yes, and also when before you're preparing to go to meet people or mingle with people, it's sometimes good, if you're going to talk with a specific person, to think what their outcome might be. Think about the conversation from their point of view. Right now, as we go into such political talking among people, that here again, you have to sort of think what they might be thinking, or how they might come back with you, so that you don't, here again, ruin a friendship or something with by responding a little too abruptly or in too much of a debate phase, because you don't want to get into a debate with somebody, because that will lead you sort of down the wrong path. Not the wrong path, but an uncomfortable path anyway. Yeah, that was one of the things that I tried to discover in writing about Mary Edwards Walker in my book, is what was her personality really like? Because I think all the suffragists, and you keep reading that more and more now, were really game players. They sort of had a handbook for holding up their signs, or also talking, the way they talked with people, the way they reacted to generate press. And so that's one of they may have been the earliest PR practitioners, because they were trying to get people to vote for the 19th Amendment.
I won't wane too, I won't wax and wane too poetically here. But I will say that, there is the strategery when you're trying to get a point across, when you're trying to make your point, that yes, the suffragists, they were very strategic and they were very smart. And those ladies, and even there were some men who were behind them, not a lot and not very vocally, but there was a strategy to all of it. And so, but you have to also be careful when it's interpersonal connections and relationships, that you don't go into it assuming what the other person is thinking. You have to make sure that yes, you can think ahead and be like, how might they respond if I say this, or how might they respond if I act this way, or communicate in this form. So we have to be sure that we approach all of our conversations with kindness and an open mind. I think that's one of the things that the suffragists really had, was they had open minds. They knew that women could contribute to society in a way that men can't. They just can't, because we're different. We have different things that we bring to the table. And they came to the table and they said, all right, I'm going to convince you because I am worth it. And they did. And they didn't do it in such a way, they weren't spitting and yelling and cussing and fighting over it. They just showed up and they said, here we are. You know what I mean?
Well, one thing that I just was reading yesterday is that there's a new musical coming out on Broadway in April, and I think it's called SUF, SUF. Anyway, it's about the whole suffragist movement. So it's a topic that's still in subtlety, or we're still thinking about it, and writing about it as I have. So it brings up sometimes if you're looking for something light to talk about, that you can bring it up at your next cocktail party, or even when at the quilting club. But it's sort of a strange topic to switch to. Anyway, the getting back to the writing business, I think that there are so many 300,000 books, I think, a year are being published, and that's have them reviewed, all of them reviewed and even read, is difficult. So if you're, my only tip for a writer is if you're a writer, write for yourself more than anything else, maybe for your family and for enjoyment. Get some enjoyment out of what you're writing about, because I think you may need to find another career to support yourself. Very, very few lucky writers are going to get up there on the bestseller list, or get reviewed in the New York Times or whatever, Washington Post and so forth. And so you have to really write today for enjoyment, for your personal satisfaction.
I agree. And and with that, you have to determine, what does success look like for me? When do I think that I'm successful? Is it going to be getting on that bestsellers list? Then, you're going to have to set some very lofty goals. But if you count success as somebody has read your story, somebody has read your work, and they have said, this spoke to me, like, to me, that's success, right? Like, when I can move somebody with the story that I've told, I find myself feeling like I've made it. I don't need a bestsellers list, because I communicated what I felt was necessary and somebody received it and it made an impact on them. Success. You just have to determine for yourself, what does success look like?
Yes, and success is a whole topic, just like conversation is. I personally believe that you have one success and then you go up, you can move on and you have another success, that you're having a chain of successes throughout your life. You're not just counting on one thing at the very end. But anyway, one big thing. The success comes in so many different elements and styles. Raising your family successfully, and then writing successfully, career successfully, even just planning a business meeting within your company, and it turns out just great and everybody's giving you a compliment. That's a success. And so that's my viewpoint, that success is really one little bit after another.
Absolutely. And I think that's all about mindset and perspective. How are you perceiving this moment? Because, hey, my kid has made it 14 years and hasn't needed a therapist. I find that to be quite the success. Just saying.
Oh, well, that's a whole nother topic too.
I'm telling you, I could go on forever, but I won't, because I know that you also have things that you need to get done today. But I want to ask, how can listeners connect with you in your work? Because they will find some serious value in connecting with you. I can just tell. And so, how can we connect with you in your work?
Well, I do have an email, fealtman@yahoo.com. I do have a Facebook page, and yes, in fact, I live in Baltimore. So I think the best way is just send me your address through an email, and I'll respond to you. I give away or tell a lot of people my on writing different things. There's so many different genres today that people like to talk about what they could write about and where they can go for markets. So yes, I really feel very generous. Feel like I want to be generous to people in some of the places that I have had some success.
Oh, I love that. And I'll make sure that, in the show notes where people can go and read about you and that kind of thing, all of your contact information that you've provided will be there, so they can just click a button and they can email you directly, or go to your Facebook page. That would be fantastic.
And that would be the best.
It would be. And I will make sure that it happens. And now I have one very big and important question for you. Are you ready? It's time for the big question.
Okay.
Okay. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you want listeners to walk away with if they hear nothing else?
To persevere. I think during COVID was a time when so many people, whatever the age, you needed to learn how to keep going. They use all kinds of expressions, look toward the end of the tunnel and all that. But really, perseverance is within yourself. And in times like that, you need to take it day by day. It's good to think about what next week, and to plan, and, next week and so forth. But just getting through each day, which I feel is a gift, is the best advice I could give anyone. Now, whatever the age, particularly kids that, like my granddaughters that are in college, just take this day by day, and don't take everything so seriously. But perseverance would be my real key word, I think.
I think that's fantastic advice. All right, what do you want to talk about? What if I put you in charge? Where would we go from here?
I think probably back to writing, the elements of writing.
Let's do it.
Getting back into the where, when, why, and when was how I first started writing. And I think for anyone that wants to take up writing, and lots of people do, they won't tell you that, they like to be able to write something. And so just telling about where you are and what you're doing today is sort of reporting on yourself. And that's the best way, I think, to get into writing. And also reading. Reading is very necessary to seeing how words flow. And so rewriting what you've written is another good way. Also, whatever you're writing, read it out loud to yourself. That's a very key way to sort of rewrite right there while you're talking. So those are sort of my tidbits of advice on learning to write or even perfecting some of your writing.
I think that's excellent advice. It's really funny because I can't stand to hear myself talk. Like I don't like hearing my own voice, which is ironic considering I host a podcast, but it's true. And I don't like hearing my own work read back to me. I don't know why. I find it very uncomfortable. I'm just not there with myself yet. But I would like to be. However, I can read something 12 times and then my husband will listen to it with his little document reader. He has like the document reader app on his phone. And he's like, you have like 14 errors. And I'm like, oh no, I didn't know that. But he has heard them because it's very different when you hear it read back to you than when you're just reading it. And so, yes, I think that's really good advice. And I'm getting a little more comfortable with it. But yes, he's one of my best proofreaders though, because he will listen. He hears the details. He hears the mistakes. And he's like, just circle that for you.
Or the yellow pen or whatever people use.
That's right. He highlights it and says, go find this and fix it. It's so funny. It's so good. Well, Francis, thank you so much for being here today and having this conversation. I think it's an important conversation that people need to hear more of and they need to learn. And I think there are plenty of resources out there that can teach you to have good conversations and better, healthier communication. We just need to be willing to seek them out.
Well, yes, seeking them out is not too hard to do because YouTube is just filled with all types of advice. And if you have the time, you can listen to 2 or 3 of YouTube conversations and you're ready to meet the world.
Absolutely. And honestly, like starting this podcast, one, it was selfish because I wanted to find resources that would make me a better author and a better seller of my books. But on the other hand, it's also made me a more effective communicator and listener because I'm constantly interacting with people. And it's true. Practice it. If you practice communicating with people, people aren't as scary as we make them out to be.
Oh, absolutely. You're correct. 100%.
Well, I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day and that we can have another conversation in the near future because I think there's a lot of wisdom to be had from you.
Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely.